The posterior pituitary hormones, or ADH, which target the kidneys to reabsorb more water in times of dehydration, and oxytocin, which target the uterus for uterine contraction during childbirth, as well as the breast to stimulate milk flow. The anterior pituitary produces tropic hormones, ACTH for the adrenal cortex, TSH for the thyroid, FSH and LH for the ovaries and testes, prolactin for the breasts, and HGH for most of the body's cells. We'll talk about these hormones separately. There are more hormones made by the hypothalamus and released by the anterior pituitary that influence the release of anterior pituitary hormones. We'll discuss them as they come up. These hypothalamic hormones are conducted to the anterior pituitary by way of the portal system of capillaries between the two structures. As a side note, there is actually an intermediate region between the two lobes that secrete MSH, melanocyte-stimulating hormone. While it can manipulate the activity of pigment-containing skin cells in some vertebrates, its role in humans is unclear. Made in the hypothalamus, but distributed by the posterior pituitary. Stored and released in the posterior lobe, ADH and oxytocin. Just the two that you need to know. It's important to note that the hypothalamus produces more hormones. The rest are tropic hormones, released into the circulatory system and destined for the nearby anterior pituitary. These hormones, will collectively called hypothalamic releasing hormones, or HRH, travel in the short circulatory tract of capillaries called the portal system. Upon receipt, the anterior pituitary releases the appropriate tropic hormone. So tropic hormones are made in the anterior pituitary. And they include adrenocorticotropic hormone, prolactin, thyroid-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, and human growth hormone. The human growth hormone affects many parts of the body. It is a tropic hormone because despite the direct effect on cell function, it also stimulates endocrine cells in the liver to produce growth factor hormones. HGH influences protein synthesis, cell division, and growth, especially cartilage, bone, and muscle, and especially during puberty. Too little, and you get pituitary dwarfism, a normally proportioned but very small person. In this picture here is Warwick Davis, an English actor. Too much and you get gigantism. Continued overproduction into adulthood and you get acromegaly, disproportionate growth, especially with the face, hands and feet, as well as a propensity toward abnormally functioning organ systems. In the picture here is Robert Wadlow, a young man who had pituitary overstimulated by a tumor. He died at 22 years of age. HGH therapy, once garnered from cadavers, is now a product of DNA recombination technology, to be discussed later in this course, and utilizes synthetic human HGH. So the human growth hormone regulates growth, development, and metabolism. It stimulates the growth of muscles, connective tissue, and the growth of growth plates at the ends of long bones, most predominantly during puberty when used in combination with sex hormones, what are also more proliferate at this time. Human growth hormone also affects almost every tissue, either by direct stimulation or by acting as a tropic hormone and stimulating the release of hormones from the endocrine cells inside the liver, called growth factors. Too much causes gigantism and acromegaly, and too little causes pituitary dwarfism. Synthetic human HGH from DNA recombination is where the human HGH gene is inserted into bacteria, which are then allowed to proliferate and discharge the HGH en masse. The thyroid gland. The anterior pituitary hormone, TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone, is released when the hypothalamus sends a releasing hormone, HRH, via the portal system. TSH is a tropic hormone that targets the thyroid gland. Located in front of the trachea, the thyroid secretes two hormones, thyroxine, T4, and triiodothyronine, T3. T4 is released in greater amounts, about 65% of the thyroid hormones. The cells of the thyroid, T3 and T4, regulate metabolism. Increases in either causes an increase in cellular respiration, more ATP, and the generation of heat. The negative feedback cycle. Your handout shows this. Again, it's not unreasonable to be asked to reproduce this in an exam. The hypothalamus releases a hormone prompting the release of TSH from the anterior pituitary. This targets the thyroid, which responds by producing T3 and T4. Once sufficient amounts of thyroid hormones are detected by the anterior pituitary and hypothalamus, TSH and hypothalamic releasing hormone production is stopped. The absence of TSH, of course, stops T3 and T4 release. So the thyroid consists of two lobes on either side of the trachea, just below the larynx or the voice box. Glandular tissue that also houses the parathyroid glands. More on those in a moment. The primary effect is to increase metabolism and affects multiple organs. It metabolizes fats, proteins, carbohydrates, increases cellular respiration, generates body heat, and affects particularly the heart, muscles, liver, and kidneys. Hypothyroidism is where you have too little production of T3 and T4. Thyroxine also affects growth and development of children, influencing the organization of cells into tissues and organs. Too little thyroid hormones affect kids negatively. Later in life, a slowed metabolism generates unpleasant symptoms. Treatment may be as simple as thyroxine injections. Some of the symptoms of hypothyroidism would include cretinism in children, lethargy and being frequently cold, and weight gain. Hyperthyroidism is when we have too much T3, T4 production. Overproduction of thyroid hormones increases the rate of cellular respiration. Symptoms would include anxiety, insomnia, heat intolerance, and weight loss. And while weight loss might be nice, the associated side effects of a hyperactive metabolism can be debilitating. Mild hypothyroidism can be a reason why some people seem to be able to eat lots without apparently gaining weight. Goiter, overstimulation of the thyroid by TSH, causes an enlargement of the thyroid. If the thyroid doesn't produce enough T3 and T4 hormones, most commonly due to lack of dietary iodine, since the active components of T3 and T4 is iodine, then the pituitary continuously releases TSH, believing that doing so will release more thyroid hormones. The negative feedback system does not shut off TSH production until T3 and T4 levels are high enough. A swollen neck results, causing a condition called goiter. Speaking of iodine, in the Chernobyl reactor accident in the Ukraine on April 26, 1986, radioactive iodine poured into the atmosphere. People were given heavy doses of iodine tablets. This is so that any radioactive iodine residing in their thyroid could be removed by a higher concentration of normal iodine. Radioactive iodine would have caused tissue damage and cancerous tumors. Once home to about 14,000 residents, 600,000 people were highly exposed. The city is mostly uninhabited. Calcitonin is a hormone released when calcium ion levels in the blood are too high. Calcitonin is also produced in the thyroid gland. It stimulates the uptake of calcium into the bones. The parathyroid glands are 4 small glands attached to the thyroid. Surgeons treating goiter mistakenly remove the parathyroid glands along with sections of the hyperactive thyroid. This caused more serious problems. Rapid uncontrolled muscle twitching due to abnormal calcium levels in the blood happened. Unlike any of the other hormones discussed so far, Release of the parathyroid hormones is due to chemical changes in the immediate surroundings rather than tropic hormones. So PTH is released in response to decreasing blood calcium concentrations. 98% of the body's calcium is held in storage by the skeletal system. When PTH is released, calcium is liberated from the bone cells. PTH also stimulates the kidneys to reabsorb calcium from the urine, activating vitamin D, which also acts to stimulate the absorption of calcium from food in the intestine. The resulting increase in calcium ion concentrations causes a negative feedback response, shutting down PTH release. PTH is antagonistic to calcitonin. Antagonistic hormones are pairs of hormones with exactly opposite function. Another example of a negative feedback mechanism where the regulation of calcium ions in the blood is monitored, and when it's too low, PTH is released to promote increased reabsorption of calcium from food in the intestine, urine in the kidney, and the bone cells. Increased levels shut down PTH release.